Today, I'm exploring the claim the Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. In case it is not already known, I, like my conversation partner in this video, am an atheist. I was excited to explore this claim with Scott as, in general, the Street Epistemology community can too often feel biased in favour of only challenging claims that are counter to an atheistic worldview. Scott, who is admirably aware of this perception, wanted to help address this by volunteering to explore this claim. I genuinely want people to believe things for good reasons and notice if they are holding a position for bad reasons, and this is certainly no less true when I'm agreeing with the claim. Street Epistemology therefore should be used to explore and challenge claims regardless of the opinion of the street epistemologist. In other words, the objective should always be the same regardless of the claim. After reflecting on this conversation, I can say that in some places I might have failed to stick to the epistemology of the claim and instead, in essence, was steel-manning some form of Christian apologetics. Whilst this presented practical challenges to Scott's claim, I wonder about the value of the reflections that they induced. Rather than reflecting on Scott's epistemology, in other words, I was inviting him to reflect on the validity of my questions. I would be interested to hear your views on this approach in the comments. I would be especially interested to hear from anybody who genuinely would disagree with this claim. Was I going too easy? What challenges do you think I should have raised? I want to keep these conversations as short as possible, and so I have started this video at the point where we begin to explore the claim. This skips the asking for consent and some early banter and rapport building, all of which happened before the video starts. If you feel that this would be better for me to include in future videos at the expense of brevity, please also do let me know in the comments. As a final note, I've asked Scott if he would be interested in swapping seats with me in a follow-up video, allowing Scott to take the role of the street epistemologist, with me taking up his claim. Scott has agreed that this would be fun, so keep an eye out for that in the future. So you're familiar with the methods of street epistemology, and so you have your claim today. So the claim that you submitted was the Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. You happy with that phrasing of the claim?
Yeah, I think that's a good framing. It's
perfect.
It's the closest I could get to making a positive claim that would reflect, an atheist standpoint without going so far as to say like there are no gods as a statement. Because we already had the discussion about Russell's teapot. I can't say that there isn't something outside the realm of human knowledge. Daniel Ray, who is a professional apologist, and he's actually been reaching out to the SE community on the SE Discord recently. And we've had some productive conversations. And one thought experiment he brought me into was to imagine like drawing a circle of what is human knowledge and what could be outside the circle. And he suggested, well, is it possible that God could be outside that circle? And by definition, yes, anything could be outside that circle. I mean, unless you want to go into things of like, there couldn't be an invisible pink unicorn outside that circle because that definition is a contradiction in terms, and therefore it's kind of defined into impossibility. But for all I know, Cthulhu is playing backgammon with Vishnu out there.
What an arresting image! I love it. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. So it's a positive claim. The Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. I think it's a perfectly valid claim. It talks about evidence right in the claim. Presumably, you would act differently in the world if you believe this. If you were to be, if your opinion about this claim would change, is that correct?
Yeah. If I felt that the Bible were sufficient evidence, I would behave differently. In fact, I did behave differently in my past when I was a Christian, when I was convinced by the Bible.
I get you.
Of its claims. So yeah, it definitely does shape my behavior.
Absolutely. So let's explore this claim. So a standard SE question. So let's get your confidence on the claim that the Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. On a 0 to 100. This is interesting. So 0 would be absolutely not confident in that proposition at all, and 1 would be essentially you would believe it would be certainly true. No doubt.
Yeah, that's tricky because, like, if you ask me, like, if I my claim of that God described in the Bible not existing, I'd be like, well, 99% because I have to give myself some wiggle room. But if we're trying to say, if the claim is that that this particular text is insufficient to convince me or to convince a reasonable person of that claim, that I guess I would go all the way to 100.
Excellent. Okay, so we're 100% confident that the Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. Now,
yeah, mostly
you already addressed that component of what it means to believe in God. So presumably, what you would mean is it's insufficient for you to believe in God. Is that correct?
I can really only speak to my own perspective.
Gotcha.
In that sense, but when I make the claim, I try to think of like, well, what would a rational, reasonable human being think? Well, like if I, laid out these premises, would I expect any rational being to see that evidence and come to that same conclusion?
Would you would you be happy to say that it would be insufficient for anybody to believe in God? It should be insufficient for anybody to believe in God.
Yeah, because excluding the possibility that I'm crazy or someone I'm meeting is crazy. I mean, not to use that term so loosely, but yeah.
I got you. Yeah. I hear you. So let's clarify a few terms then. When you say Bible, what do you mean specifically?
Familiar with the collection of texts known as the Holy Bible in Christian communities, which concludes of like the Old Testament, which is known as the Torah isn't the correct term. Like the Old Testament, which includes like the Jewish texts, also includes the Gospels and further writings of the epistles and of the writings of the early church, commonly known as the New Testament. Yeah.
So is there a particular, you're aware, I'm sure that there are many versions of this Bible, the document, and is there a particular version of the Bible that you're making this claim for, or would you make the claim for all versions of the Bible?
I think I'd make that claim for all versions of the Bible. Okay.
And similarly to the clarification around the Bible, when you say to believe in God, is it specifically the God of the Christian Bible, or is it insufficient evidence to believe in the existence of any God?
Technically, well, yes. When I say this, I mean it's insufficient evidence for the God as described in the Bible. I think the Bible presents a case more or less for the God of the Bible. I don't think it presents a very good case for other deities. So I feel like it's a very much insufficient evidence to believe in Zeus. So maybe it's good for that too. But specifically, I'm thinking in terms of the claim of the God as described in the Bible.
Excellent.
If I can get more detail, that is stated as a being that has created the universe, has described in some verses as having something, if not exactly omniscience, very darn close to omniscience. Then that deity also became incarnate in the human known as Jesus of Nazareth, who then died, then didn't die, and walked on the earth before disappearing. And then other things about judging us and forgiving us.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. So now that we've clarified the terms, we know what Bible and what God we're talking about. How have you determined that this claim is true? And again, the claim is that the Bible is insufficient evidence to believe in God. How have you determined that is true?
Yeah, I think I determined that the historicity of the Bible has what's the best way to describe this? That the way in which the texts have been treated have indicated just unreliability on its accuracy. The claims within it definitely warrant strong speculation, and the texts themselves don't meet up that level of speculation, in my opinion. And it's got extraordinary claims. The history of the church and the history of the Bible in terms of how it was written all indicate, in my mind, just very unreliable texts for reflecting an objective reality.
I got you. Could something be unreliable but still be describing a true event?
Broken clock is right twice a day.
Right. So there could be inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the Bible, but it could still be genuine recollections of a true event.
Well, if it's inaccurate, then it wouldn't be reflecting that true event.
Okay.
I mean, but
yeah,
that's how I define accuracy, that it reflects something true.
But presumably somebody could write an inaccurate recollection about some event that occurred, and whilst the details and the sort of clarity and consistency of that description may be wildly varied, it is possible that that event still occurred, that inspired that person to write something. Yes,
some true event may have happened, which then leads to a bunch of inaccurate records describing that event. Yes.
I got you. Cool. Awesome. Have you read the Bible?
Yes. It's not cover to cover.
Okay.
But pretty thorough amount. All the Gospels. Good chunk of the Old Testament.
Is it possible that if you haven't read the entirety of the Bible, that there is sufficient evidence for the truth of God, or sufficient reason to believe in God in the Bible, in the parts that you have not read? How can you be 100% confident that a book you have not completely read doesn't contain sufficient evidence?
That's a good question. So I would say there is that the sections that I have read, I know enough of the Bible to know like the cliff notes of, or when I was, actively studying the Bible and in my confirmation class in church and stuff like that, my pastor did want us to be like vaguely knowledgeable of the Bible, and to make sure that we had ideas of at least what sections of the Bible were about. So by reading all of the Gospels, those are the accounts of the actions of Jesus of Nazareth, and that's the primary bulk of the concept of Immaculate Conception and God coming down human as, God incarnate on earth, dying, the death and resurrection. All of those claims are contained in that section of the Bible. I've also read pretty much the entire Pentateuch, which includes the creation story of the earth and other events, but so the primary claims that I laid out of the God as described being the creator of the universe and the death and resurrection of Jesus, I have read the sections on that stuff. So I know that the other texts are secondary sources explaining stuff on there. So that's why I'm confident that those sections do not provide additional evidence towards the claim.
But it's certainly possible that there could be things in the Bible which might be persuasive to you, because that you have not read yet.
I suppose it's possible. Sure.
Cool. No problem. Would you agree that the Bible is a complex book?
Yes. I would actually say that the definition of the Bible as a book is inaccurate, because technically it's like 60 something books. I'm sounding really uninformed about the Bible today because I'm just I haven't been in that world for so long. But yeah, it's like 40 something books in the Old Testament and 20 something in the New Testament. So each book has a different author or authors, and they're coming from, a very long period of history from just being written, not even all in the same language. So it's this is a very complicated collection of texts.
So given this complexity of what we consider to be the Bible, is it possible that you may have come across things which, on a better understanding, if you'd come to a better understanding of them, may have been more convincing to you, may have provided you better evidence for the existence of God, had you had a better understanding of these complex books?
I suppose there's always a possibility that my understanding of something is wrong. So yeah, it's possible I could understand something differently or understand something better,
Gotcha.
in a better, more accurate sense. And yeah.
So it might be fair to say then that your current view that the Bible is insufficient evidence to support the belief in God is based on a book you haven't entirely read and may have misunderstood. Would that be fair?
That's an accurate statement. Yes.
Awesome. If I was to speak to a biblical scholar, somebody who had spent their career studying the Bible in detail, and this scholar was to say that they believed that this was strong evidence for the belief in God, as I'm sure we can imagine, there are people in this. This is not entirely hypothetical, right? There are definitely people that would do this. If I was to be presented with a person like that who'd studied the Bible their whole life and was making the claim that it was good evidence, and your claim that it was not good evidence, would I be more or less rational listening to the scholar than to you on this point?
Yeah, I would definitely let the scholar speak, let someone that knows more of the details about the historicity of the Bible speak. So yeah, I would not advise anyone to form their beliefs solely on my opinion and solely on my knowledge.
So how could I determine which of you was guiding my confidence correctly? That your assertion that it's not sufficient evidence to believe in God, and a scholar who's spent their life studying the Bible and is claiming that it is sufficient evidence?
Well, one element I would advise someone to consider when talking to any individual and using them as a potential source for information is to consider if they could potentially be biased in any way. If an individual is... human beings have a tendency to develop senses of tribalism, and the mind becomes very defensive about protecting its own worldview and its own in-group. And this is very evident when you look at political parties nowadays, particularly as an American. So I would definitely be concerned, and oh, hello, my cat's visiting.
Hello, cat.
Yes, I have a cat. And nice. She's annoying.
The views on this video have just gone up exponentially at this point.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, you want to say hi? All right. So I would definitely advise someone to consider if someone could potentially be biased in the way they approach the evidence in front of them. And I am not going to say that I am, without fault, and that I couldn't also, now that I consider myself to be an atheist, have a bit of in-group bias on wanting to defend the atheist position just because it's my position.
Gotcha.
And I'd be very skeptical of anyone that is, say, if they're a member of the clergy, or if they were a professional apologist, or if they were in any ways, professionally motivated to maintain this position, that it could affect the way they find and present the evidence for their claim. Exactly, that's right. They could be biased. And I shouldn't assume that. They could definitely have high quality work. I should judge them by the work they do on a case-by-case basis. You're right.
So what would you, if we were to suggest that the Bible was insufficient evidence, what would you consider sufficient evidence to believe in God?
So I've laid out a couple claims on how I'm describing the God of the Bible, just kind of giving a Cliff Notes version. I tried not to make it too specific to any individual creed or sect, but I tried to have just the generic stuff covered, mostly in the Apostles' Creed. So for the concept of God creating the universe, and we have a rather detailed, I don't want to call it a detail, but we have a creation story of the period of 7 days, and each type of, like, we have, separation in the waters and the seas, and we have, when we get mammals, we get birds, we get fish and plants, and for me to believe that that section of text is accurate, for that section to be, a story that is, I would think I need to learn something about why all of the studies that humanity has done about the creation of life and the development of species and the age of the earth is somehow faulty. Currently, by biblical scholars estimate that the Bible, the earth, strictly by the text in the Bible, is roughly 6,000 years, whereas scientists that understand carbon dating, or they look at the rings in the trees, and I watched a little bit of that debate a long time ago with Bill Nye and Ken Ham, and I kind of tuned out of it halfway through. But there's different conclusions about how old the earth is, and I didn't list the age of the earth in my definition of like Christianity or the God described in the Bible. But that's kind of an example of just how I would need to understand how all this evidence that's been found for these species developing over periods of millennia is false, and this story of it happening in 6 days is true. That is one aspect that I find that I would need to learn a lot about, how, like, oh, breaking news, everything about historic science is faulty for some reason. And
so there are definitely some people that would, I think, read the Bible and interpret it in a different way, such that it wouldn't necessarily have to conflict with modern scientific understandings of these ideas. How can you be sure that those people that are reading it in that way, where it might be compatible with the current scientific worldview, are not accurately doing so, and that's not a valid way of interpreting the Bible?
Okay, so if it's not a valid, if interpreting the creation story, or if interpreting the Bible literally to take the words as written, is not a valid way of interpreting the text, that tells me that the text is a poor source. If the text is saying the world was created in 6 days, and the evidence that we can find so far tells us otherwise, that tells me that there's something wrong with the text. If the text said the world was created a long, long time ago, that's vague, doesn't have details, and that's fine, I suppose. But we're finding details in the story that are directly conflicted by evidence. So if I am taking this book, and when I read it, if I'm not supposed to just trust the book, if I'm supposed to apply some sort of poetic understanding, if I'm supposed to meditate and allow it to its meaning to become inspired within me, then I'm using something other than the book to find whatever is true. And that tells me that I'm not using this book. I'm using some other means of reflection or something, which is why I go back to that claim of this book is insufficient.
Might it be the case that the book was created in such a way as to inspire people to read it in a certain way, rather than be a literal account? So could a book be untrue but inspirational, such that it inspires people to acquire the truth, rather than be a literal explanation of events and therefore giving people the truth?
Yeah, Bible could be, various texts could be written with the intent of being interpreted metaphorically. First thought I think of was like Aesop's fables. No one's meant to believe that a tortoise literally had a race with a hare, but we are meant to infer a true lesson from that story. Big bad wolves don't, start asking girls what's in their bread baskets, but there are lessons to be learned about how to travel safely and not talk to strangers.
And look after your grandmother. Yes.
And that's a lesson everyone should take to heart. Take care of your grandmother. So, I'm sorry. So yeah, it's definitely possible that it is meant to be interpreted metaphorically, in which case the historical claims, like, is the concept of like what else in there is meant to be metaphorical. Is the idea of a God creating the world, is that a metaphor? Is the idea of Jesus dying and resurrecting, is that also a metaphor? All these claims about this, anything happening between those covers, if that's meant to be a metaphor, then that kind of takes the wind out of the sails of the claim itself of this God existing.
Is the presence of the Bible some evidence for the existence of God?
The existence of the Bible being some evidence, it does provide some evidence of some people being convinced of this particular narrative. Yes. So it does provide, so that is more than nothing. So some evidence, sure, I will say that.
So it is evidence, but in your view, not sufficient evidence.
Yes, it tells me that a couple people in the Bronze, some people, entire tribes of people in the Bronze Age were very confident that this God existed.
Cool. If the Bible's contents was proven to be true, if the events really did occur as described, would you then believe in the God of the Bible?
Yeah, if the book describing this God was proven to be an accurate description of this God, an accurate description of reality, that it was evidence, then yes, if that convinced me, I'd be convinced.
So how have you come to determine that the events of the Bible are not true?
So I'm trying to answer your question concisely and not just go on the whole rabbit hole of like my own deconstruction process, which I'm okay with sharing, but I'm not sure if that's what you want for an SE. No, I'm not sure if that'd be in the spirit of an SE conversation.
Possibly. I would love to have that conversation with you though. I love hearing those journeys, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, just how did I start to, the question was, how did I start to doubt the accuracy of the Bible?
So we established that if the stories of the Bible were true, you would therefore, I think, consider it sufficient evidence, right? As if the reason it's insufficient, in other words, to you, it appears that the reasons that it's not sufficient is that you do not believe it is true. So the question then is, how have you determined that it is not true?
I would say that I believe that it is not true because I believe it is insufficient. And the reasons I find it insufficient have to do with more details of how the creation of this document was. So just narrowing our focus to just the Gospels, they were not written by firsthand accounts. They were written after several decades, a few generations of oral tradition, people saying, oh yeah, your grandfather knew this one guy and he did this thing that one time. And passing through several generations of illiterate people, that tells me that it's not a very reliable account of what happened. That doesn't mean it's false in itself, but it definitely provides doubt in my mind. In addition, studying into the history of the Bible and how it was constructed, in terms of how the early church was and how it got adopted into the Roman Empire, and how much of the people in power were shaping the way the texts were constructed, it definitely indicates in my mind that these people in power could have definitely twisted and changed things in their favor. In particular, there was the Council of Nicaea, which was a collection of early church members when they were taking the text and literally like took it to a vote on, should this text be considered part of the Bible? In the Bible, it's the holy word of God, or into the rubbish heap? And the nays have it.
Some people would contest that's how the Council of Nicaea actually operated, and that's what how they authored the Bible. But I would
be open to more information about the Council of Nicaea.
For sure, that's always good. More information is always a good thing. Mm-hmm. Is it necessary to prove something is not true?
Is it necessary to prove that something is not true? I think it depends on the context, but in general, I would say, like, if this is a question of the burden of proof, I would say the burden of proof falls on the person making the claim. I mean, I could go into very classic cliche examples of how I don't really feel the need to prove to people that leprechauns don't exist just because they show up on cereal boxes. I don't know if you were taking that question somewhere else, though.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. I think, take it wherever you like. I think, yes, I guess the idea that is it necessary for you to disprove that Bertrand Russell's teapot is flying around Saturn?
Yeah, and that was discovery of Russell's teapot was a big part in my deconversion process of realizing, like, oh, well, this thing could potentially exist. Originally, after I lost confidence in the Bible and the specific claims being made about the God as described, I then shifted into more of a deistic view of that. Well, I mean, a God could have existed, and maybe it's just beyond us to make any descriptions or make any real claims about what this God is like. There was a big bang at some point in the future. Maybe there was a big fuse that caused that big bang, and that big bang could have been God, potentially. Why not? It's outside the realm of human knowledge. And then when I learned about Bertrand Russell's teapot, like, well, it makes a lot more sense to not carry these beliefs around if you don't have something backing it up. If I don't have a reason to believe that there was necessarily that, like, in the beginning, the Lord said bang, making that statement and making that claim and holding that belief just feels unjustified or foolish.
I get you. I think, Scott, that's probably a good place to park this SE conversation. I would like to ask you if you feel more or less confident in your claim that the Bible is insufficient evidence for the existence of God at the end of it. Have you changed your view on that at all?
I mean, I think you knocked me down from that 100% of where I was to the 99% of I think the actual God might really exist. 99 fraction phantasmal thing, just because you make some good points on how I don't know everything there is to know about how the Council of Nicaea behaved. I don't know everything that is even in the Bible. And there is a possibility that someone was right and just wrote it down wrong. Like, there could be just every gospel writer could have been a blind squirrel who found a nut. And the text is, very poor, carrying through that way. Although, if such a thing were to happen, if this God did exist, and maybe the events didn't occur exactly how they went down in the Bible, but everyone back then was writing it down as best they could, and things carry on together. This section of the conversation is a bit more like counter-apologetics, but I feel like the Bible, God of the Bible, is described as you don't see the word omniscient, but it's pretty close. There's that one verse like of before you were, I created you in the womb, I knew you, or something like that. I live in Florida, the United States. There's a lot of anti-women's rights billboards that put that verse out there. So it's not, so I know it's in there somewhere. I can't tell you the verse.
Yeah.
So if there's this omniscient being who created everything and knows what's going to happen, I would think that God would put a bit more effort into getting the word out. Like a little bit.
He would be better at marketing.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, if you're going to go to the trouble of coming down to earth, being tortured and dying to give people this news, then like.
But presumably, if there was a God that was, as some people describe, immortal, omniscient, omnipotent, living outside space and time, all powerful, etc., it wouldn't be unreasonable to say, I think, that we could not understand an entity like that. And therefore, might it be reasonable to say that if they were acting in the world, our intuitions as to the reasonableness of those actions might not be useful to us?
Yeah, it's possible. Just as like a child can't really understand, what adults are thinking about, it's possible that we can't understand the complexity of some sort of omniscient, omnipotent throughout time and space being. Although I would expect such a being to understand us better.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Scott, I've really genuinely enjoyed this opportunity to explore this claim with you. And I would like to end the SE interview at this point, because I think in any case, these things, it's useful to sort of put a stop on them after a certain period, because it gives people time to think. I think these kinds of claims are just as fun to explore for me as any others, for sure. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Yeah.